At a high-level summit meant to unite Africa, President Tinubu tried to humiliate Ibrahim Traore in front of the world. But what Traore did next changed everything. But before we continue, make sure you subscribe to this channel, a channel that reveals the power, dignity, and quiet strength of real African leadership. Rain fell softly against the tinted windows of Abuja's Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport as a black military SUV rolled onto the tarmac. Ibrahim Traore stepped out slowly, wearing his uniform with silent confidence, boots hitting the wet ground with deliberate calm. No words were exchanged, no gestures were made, only the sound of the rain and the unspoken understanding that this visit was not like the others. It wasn't diplomacy, it was a statement. The ECOWAS summit was supposed to be about unity, about rebuilding trust across West Africa, but no one believed in that anymore. Behind closed doors, alliances were shifting, old powers were tightening their grip. Whispers filled the Hilton conference halls. Nigeria, led by President Tinubu, was pushing for renewed sanctions against Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And now as Traore entered that space, every step he took echoed louder than the speeches that were yet to be made. His Minister of Foreign Affairs leaned in and whispered, "They say Tinubu called you a boy with a gun and no table to sit at." Traore didn't blink. "Then we build our own table," he replied calmly, continuing his stride through the marble corridor. Flanked by Defense Minister Kassim Koulibaly and Economic Advisor Ibrahim Bailam, he entered the summit chamber with quiet resolve. Delegates from Guinea and Mali nodded respectfully. But Nigeria's representatives? They looked away, eyes fixed on anything except the man they had already decided to isolate. President Tinubu stood near the center of the room, surrounded by polished suits and forced laughter. He did not greet Traore, not even a glance. Instead he laughed a little louder, as if to remind the room who still held the microphone. But across the aisle Ibrahim stood motionless, tall, proud, composed. He leaned slightly toward his aide and whispered, "This summit will not be remembered for what is said, but for what is revealed." And at that moment the real meeting began. The summit hall was draped in flags and gold trim, filled with the soft hum of translation headsets and the rustle of polished documents. Leaders took their seats at the long mahogany table, their nameplates gleaming under the soft light. Every movement was calculated, every glance a message, and yet no one was ready for what was about to happen. President Tinubu adjusted his glasses, leaned forward to the microphone and smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that welcomed peace. It was sharp, laced with arrogance. "Leadership," he began, voice warm but eyes cold, "is not for boys in uniforms playing revolution. It belongs to those who have earned it through age, experience, and results." A ripple of forced laughter emerged from the Nigerian corner of the room. One aide stifled a grin, another quietly muttered, "Wow." Ibrahim Traore didn't move. His hands stayed clasped on the table, his face unreadable, but his eyes, sharp, steady, unwavering, locked directly onto Tinubu's. No blink, no smirk, just presence. And in that precise instant something shifted. Tinubu paused mid-sentence, reached for a glass of water he didn't need. The confidence in his voice cracked just for a second. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, the kind of silence that doesn't wait. It speaks. Across the table, Mali's Assimi Goïta leaned back, unimpressed. Guinea's Mamadi Doumbouya narrowed his eyes at the insult. It wasn't just a jab at Traore. It was a jab at every soldier who dared to stand for their nation without waiting for permission. As the session moved forward, voices returned to formality, reports were read, statistics presented, but the tension lingered like smoke. Outside the chamber, journalists waited for sound bites. Inside, something more powerful had happened, not a speech, not a vote, but a stare. A stare that rattled the most powerful man in the room without a single word. Later, as ministers gathered in the hallway, Burkina Faso's defense minister whispered, "He wants a reaction." Traore answered without looking up, "Let him keep talking." That evening, while many delegates dined under crystal chandeliers and toasted with imported wine, Ibrahim Traore walked alone through the dim hallways of the Hilton. His steps were deliberate, his mind sharp. He had not answered the insult, not with words. But he knew the response had already begun, not on stage, not through press releases, but in silence, where real power takes shape. Defense Minister Kassim Kulabali caught up to him near the executive wing. "Let me handle this tomorrow," he urged. "Make a strong statement. Show them we will bow." But Traore shook his head gently. "We don't speak," he said. "We build." And with that, he walked past the elevators, not to his room, but to the quiet floors below where no press could follow. Behind closed doors, far from the microphones and spotlight, rooms reserved for Guinea and Mali's delegations flickered with low light. In Suite 409, Assimi Goïta stood up and greeted him with a firm handshake. "We heard what happened," he said. "Tinubu's mouth moves faster than his policies." Traore nodded once, calm. "Then we'll move faster than both." Later, in a smaller meeting with Guinea's Mamadi Doumbouya, they sat with nothing but a notepad between them. Ideas flowed, shared mineral routes, defensive alignment, independent communication networks, all outside ECOWAS. No cameras. No headlines. Just African minds mapping a future that didn't ask for permission. Outside, the lights of Abuja danced across rooftops, unaware of the shift unfolding in quiet rooms. What began as a personal insult was becoming something far greater, an opportunity. An alliance not built on outrage, but on shared vision. Not sparked by retaliation, but by resolve. At 2 a.m, Traore returned to his suite. His ministers rose, waiting anxiously. "No retaliation," he said softly. "Not tomorrow, not ever. We are not here to react to disrespect. We are here to outgrow it." By morning, the air inside the ECOWAS chamber was heavier than the day before. Delegates murmured cautiously, sipping coffee, glancing at their agendas, but no one spoke of the obvious, the insult from Tinubu and the silence that followed. Ibrahim Traore arrived precisely on time. No smile. No entourage. Just presence. He sat near the edge of the chamber, far from the central table where Tinubu laughed the night before with foreign guests. The message was clear. They had tried to isolate him, but they had underestimated what silence could do. Across the room, Tinubu adjusted his tie and continued with his usual charm. He raised a glass, joked with a French ambassador, and gestured to a reporter nearby. But something had shifted, not in him, in the room. The same ministers who once leaned into his every word now looked elsewhere, and as Traore turned his attention to a quiet conversation with South Sudan's energy minister and Guinea-Bissau's finance envoy, something new was unfolding, a coalition in the making, far from the cameras. During the second session of the summit, Traore was granted the floor. He stood slowly, calmly, and spoke with measured resolve. "Sovereignty is not a topic for debate," he said. "It is a foundation. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are not breaking from Africa. We are breaking from control." The words were soft but sharp. No anger. No accusations. Just truth, spoken plainly enough to make the walls feel closer. From the central row, Tinubu shifted in his chair. He raised a hand and interrupted, "Let the adults speak." The words sliced the room in half. A few gasps. One aide whispered, "Did he really say that?" The camera zoomed in. A flash from the media pit. For a second, time froze. But Traore did not respond. He didn't speak. He didn't even blink. Instead, he closed his binder, nodded once, and sat back down. His ministers, fists clenched under the tablecloth, waited for a cue that never came. Because that was the cue. Restraint. Discipline. Dignity. And in that silence, something irreversible happened, not in politics, as in perception. The real shift wasn't in the words exchanged. It was in the way men listened. And in the moment Traore sat down, the question on every leader's mind was no longer, "Is he ready?" It was, "Who is really in charge here?" At 8 a.m, while delegates were still drinking coffee in the hallways, President Ibrahim Traore made an unexpected move. He requested a small emergency session, not in the main room but in a simple briefing hall behind the chamber. No one knew what it was about. But those who had been watching him closely followed without question. By 9 the room was full. Delegates from Guinea, Mali, Nigeria, Chad, and even observers from Algeria and South Sudan had taken their seats. The Nigerian delegation arrived last, looking confused. President Tinubu was not there. He had sent his trade minister instead, quiet, tense, uncertain. Traore stood at the head of the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He opened a black folder, removed 3 signed documents, and placed them on the table. "This is not a speech," he said. "It is a decision." One by one, the leaders leaned forward. What they saw on those pages changed everything. It was a new trade agreement between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea. It would take effect immediately. It was about minerals, transport routes, and defense support. And it was completely outside of ECOWAS. There were no French banks involved, no dependency on foreign currency, no approval from Abuja or Accra. Just 3 African nations choosing their own direction, together. The Nigerian trade minister stood up, stunned. "You didn't consult ECOWAS," he said. Traore looked at him directly. "ECOWAS didn't consult us when they sanctioned our survival." The room went silent. Not one delegate spoke. Not one aide moved. Outside, the summit still carried on as if nothing had changed. But inside that small room, the center of power had shifted. News travels fast in politics, but this time it moved faster than anyone expected. Minutes after the agreement was signed, someone knocked on President Tinubu's door. His aide rushed in, holding a phone with shaking hands. "Sir, it's done. They signed without you." Tinubu stood up, eyes wide. "What do you mean they signed?" "Signed what?" No one had the courage to speak, but the screen already showed the headlines: Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea launch independent trade pact. Outside ECOWAS, he stormed out of his room, ignoring cameras and staff, demanding to know how it happened, but it was already done. Signed. Witnessed. Documented. And his name wasn't on any page. In the press hall, journalists were already preparing their microphones. At the center of the room stood 4 men in uniform: Traore, Goita, Doumbouya, and Chiani from Niger. No slogans, no shouting, just a calm statement that echoed louder than any protest. "We are not here to challenge," Traore began, "but to continue, with dignity." Journalists froze. Ministers whispered into headsets. Nigerian aides looked around, confused and embarrassed. It wasn't just about the documents. It was about the shift. ECOWAS had just been bypassed, not through war, but through will, in Niamey. That moment, Tinubu wasn't just late. He was no longer the one at the center of the room. And for a leader used to cameras and applause, that silence cut deeper than any speech. Behind sealed doors, the private leadership session of the summit began. No press. No cameras. Just the heads of state, their top ministers, and the heavy air left by what had just happened. President Tinubu sat stiff, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Across from him, Ibrahim Traore sat still, calm, unreadable, unshaken. Tinubu didn't wait long. He leaned forward and spoke with a sharp voice. "Who do you think you are?" he said. "You embarrass this union. You defy order. You insult every principle ECOWAS stands for." Some ministers looked down. Others glanced at Traore, wondering what he would say. But he didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. After a long pause, he answered, steady, slow, and clear, "I'm a soldier," he said. "Who became a president? Not the other way around." Silence. Chairs creaked. A few ministers from Guinea and Mali shifted their posture. Something in the room had changed, not loud, but clear. Tinubu stepped back slightly, trying to keep his composure. "You don't understand diplomacy," he muttered. Traore looked at him again. "No," he replied. "I understand sacrifice. That's the difference." No one spoke after that. The moderator tried to move to the next point on the agenda, but the tone had already shifted. Every word that followed carried new weight. Every discussion from that point on was colored by what had just been said, and by what had not. When the doors finally opened and the leaders walked out into the hallway, one truth was clear to everyone watching: the balance had shifted. As the summit neared its end, the room slowly returned to routine. Papers were shuffled. Translation headsets clicked. The moderator thanked the leaders for attending. Everyone began to prepare for departure, believing the most important moments had already passed. But they hadn't. Just as the final motion was read and the session was closing, one microphone, still live, captured something unexpected. It was Ibrahim Traore, leaning toward one of his aides. His voice was calm. Unaware the mic was still open, he said just one sentence: "Africa doesn't need dominance," he whispered. "It needs dignity." For a moment, no one noticed. But a sound technician froze. The phrase had echoed through a few headsets still connected. Someone pressed record, and within minutes, the clip began to spread. By nightfall, it had already escaped the four walls of Abuja. In Dakar, university students projected it on walls. In Lagos, young Nigerians debated its meaning on live streams. In Ouagadougou, crowds gathered in the streets, chanting beneath murals of Sankara. And in quiet homes across Africa, people listened in silence. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a plan. It was just the truth, said plainly, with no cameras watching. And that's why it mattered. The shock didn't come from what was said. It came from how it was said. With no podium. No applause. No performance. Just character. And in a world full of noise, one sentence spoken quietly was louder than anything else that day. By the next morning, the video clip had crossed borders. But the real surprise wasn't how far it reached. It was where it reached. In Nigeria itself, the country of President Tinubu, something unexpected began to stir. In the city of Ibadan, a group of young leaders posted an open letter. Is this the kind of leadership we mock, or the kind we need? In Kano, radio callers debated the phrase again and again, not with anger, but with curiosity. In Lagos, young professionals shared clips of Traore's silent moments, comparing them with Tinubu's loud reactions. And slowly, something shifted. This wasn't just an insult that backfired. It was a mirror. People began to ask, who really led that room? Not with speeches. Not with pride. But with presence. With control. With vision. Ibrahim Traore didn't respond to any of it. He didn't release a statement. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't explain what he meant. He didn't need to. Because the microphone, the one left open, had done what microphones rarely do. It had revealed something real. In Ouagadougou, the streets filled again. People waved flags. They sang his name alongside the name of Sankara. But the real power came from the silence, from what people now felt without needing to be told. For the first time in years, across borders, across generations, the question wasn't who speaks louder. The question was who leads better? And in that moment, many realized Africa was beginning to choose. As the final meetings wrapped up, the city of Abuja began to quiet down. Delegations packed their documents. Journalists rushed to publish headlines. Leaders posed for last-minute photos. But one figure slipped away with no flash, no ceremony, no statement. Ibrahim Traore left the summit before sunrise. There were no sirens. No waving. No interviews. Just a single black SUV leaving through the underground exit of the Hilton. The car moved slowly through the early morning fog toward the military airbase. Inside, his ministers sat in silence, each of them still processing everything that had happened. No one dared speak, not because they feared him, but because they respected what he had done. The viral clip still echoed across the continent. The agreement was signed. The balance had shifted. But Traore didn't show triumph. His eyes were not filled with victory, only with clarity. As they reached the runway, he turned to his team and spoke quietly. "History is not made at the podium," he said. "It's made when no one is clapping." The airplane door closed behind him. No cameras captured the moment. No headlines announced his exit. But across Africa, people were still talking. Still sharing. Still thinking. Because real power doesn't demand attention. It changes the room, and then walks away. If this story moved you, hit the like button so more people can hear it. Subscribe for more stories that reveal what the headlines hide. And tell us in the comments, do you think leadership is about noise, or about quiet strength? We read every word and we never forget.